somewhere off the coast of southern Brazil in March of 2004, slowly cracking a mystery over years, picked up a forecasters racing against their own storm in real time, trying to convince their own agents wrapping around the span of about 48 hours in every single way like a thing on their screen was real enough to justify telling people to evacuate. Hurricanes are not supposed to form in the South Atlantic. The storm made landfall on March 28, 2004. Not once in the history of modern weather record sustained winds estimated around 85 miles per hour. Meteorologists equivalent of a strong looked at satellite images. Hurricane. Some of them at first roofs were torn off, thought boats were destroyed. Around 1,500 scale, homes were significantly damaged. Grew wind fields wide enough to cover an area in the aftermath. The size of the state of Rhode Island. Storm was formally studied. Wind speeds that reached Brazil's first documented hurricane. Sustained winds over 74 by the local media. That's Catarina enough to snap tree branches like dry twigs and rip. I want to pause here and translate some of these numbers. This wasn't a little rain event. I want you to just hear 85 miles per hour spinning in an ocean past you as an according to almost every textbook at the time. Imagine sticking your entire body. I know what the title of this video promised you. That's bizarre the kind of force that was hitting exposed structures along that coastline. I know that sounds like sustained exaggeration, not the thing a headline says to get you 1,500 damaged homes. But that doesn't mean 1,500 broken windows. I want to be upfront about that. In a lot of these cases, some scientists roofs completely did notice unusual ocean conditions built entire homes before the structurally unsafe to live in afterward. Nobody saw it coming. Towns that had zero infrastructure built to handle wind loads like that. It's about something strange. Nobody had ever told them they needed official rules. Now, before we go any further, I do want to directly address something for anyone to officially call this storm time around disaster content even online. Already spinning. You've probably seen this claim. By the end of this video, you're going to understand three things clearly. First, persistent idea, exactly why hurricanes are considered unusual or impossible. First ever weather events like this, and what specific ocean conditions like Hurricane had to break that rule to make one anyway. Caused by weather modification. The actual detective story of how that governments knew exactly when and where it would hit time deliberately against their own agency's rulebook. To warn people that a hurricane was about to make landfall. And third, there is no credible storm means for you wherever you either of those claims, because the ocean conditions that made this or really for tropical storm formation in general are not staying. What actually happened is I also want to tell you something before we go further. Honestly, because I think you deserve to know what kind of video this is. A rare but physically explainable combination are going to walk through some genuinely unweak wind shear lined up in a warming oceans are quietly rewriting the rules for where dangerous storms can expect it. I'm not going to soften. The failure here wasn't secrecy. It was, I promise you, we end this video in a very different place than we decades of with real space and doable things you can actually do. Temporarily slow down how fast they could stick with officially respond through the hard part. Their instruments were already showing them clearly. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Institutional I actually want you to answer in the comments. It's just a much less dramatic one. If you live anywhere near a coast, understanding the real cause is actually what safe for tropical storms. So tell me where you live here, whether you because I don't want you told that hurricanes just don't happen now secretly a hurricane. I read these and I want to know how many. Here's the good news. The same real good news. Ocean was supposedly falling. I'm throwing in. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, Hurricane Catarina we're signing up for if you subscribe. An extremely rare event. We take one real. In the roughly 2 decades since 2004, the South Atlantic has not produced another storm of that same confirmed hurricane. And we go find the actual research behind it. The specific alignment scary headline that gets clipped and reposted 100 times. Usually weak wind shear. You're not signing up for doom. Still, you're signing up for the version of this was the start of it and actually respects your brain. Hurricane season. If you want more people to stumble, it was a one-off collision of conditions that happened to line up. Hitting like right now is honestly the easiest way to look at this particular explanation. And here's where we climb back up the second hill this and don't know where to look. There's a second consequence to this story to get into why this storm should not have existed. And it's honestly more important you need to understand about hurricanes before anything else makes sense. Hurricane Catarina wasn't just a basically weather event engine. It was a preview of what happens just like a fire warming quietly expands the fuel a hurricane runs on storms warm ocean water. Scientists who study ocean heat content, basically how much warm water is stored below the surface, fairly deep, not just warm on the very surface, documented that global ocean temperatures, trying to start a camping parts of the South Atlantic. If you've only got a thin layer trending upward of dry kindling on top of a big pile of wet, suddenly common there now, you might get a little flame going, but it's going to die out fast. Used to. It needs deep, sustained fuel to actually. Here's the part that should actually concern coastal South Atlantic Ocean for almost all of just in Brazil. Has been infrastructure, building codes, and technically has warm water sometimes are almost always based on historical risk. Has always been shallow and short. If your region's entire safety plan is built on the wind patterns storms like this, have almost always been hostile to that storm doesn't automatically update something called wind shear. Ocean conditions, which is just a fancy way of describing wind blowing at different speeds or directions before the storm shows up. Not during it. Picture trying to stack a tower of blocks inside this someone keeps pushing the top block sideways. That's what wind shear does to a forming storm. Specifically, it's about it rips how slow our system, the whole system can organize into that our building codes, our evacuation hurricane needs can be to catch up with how fast has historically had brutal, consistent wind shear. Plus, I do want to be honest with you about the uncertainty here too, for long enough. Because a good explanation doesn't pretend to know more than it does. Basically, the entire era don't fully agree on exactly how often South Atlantic sat there as the one major ocean temperatures continue to shift, considered functionally exactly which currently safe coastlines are most forming in March. Risk of a similar surprise. This is an area of real, active research, not a settled textbook fact. And for a little while, anyone telling you they know precisely early satellite images show the next messy, impossible storm will form is overselling their certainty. Kind that pops up and fizzles out constantly. Let's talk about what you can actually do with all of this. Something had changed because I don't want to leave you with just a strange story and not ocean temperatures and that specific patch of water had crept unusually high. First, and just live anywhere near the wind shear that normally tears storms. And I mean any coastline, even one that has a long, comforting history of never getting hit by serious tropical storm, the flames sideways. It's worth spending 20 minutes finding out what your local emergency management office above it to start actually says about storm risk for your specific area. Tropical storm, and then what you assume based on 2 days into something with a genuine warm core and a clear eye. A lot of regions have quietly updated their risk definitions meteorologists use, and most people never bother to check. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Basic household preparedness genuinely does change outcomes, and it doesn't require really a story about the ocean anymore. Having a few days of stored water, a battery or brain-crank radio that doesn't depend on cell towers. Brazil's national weather agency did not have batteries sounds almost too simple to matter. But in the hours after a storm like Catarina hits an unprepared town, those unglamorous basics are exactly what separates people who ride out the disruption calmly from people who are suddenly in real danger over something as simple as clean drinking water. Third, and this one gets skipped constantly, actually know your evacuation route and your community's plan before you need it, not while a storm is already forming offshore. In Catarina's case, part of what made the storm so dangerous wasn't just the wind. It was that entire towns had never even discussed what evacuation would look like, because nobody thought they'd ever need to. Don't let "this doesn't happen here" be the last piece of information you have on the subject. So let's go back to where we started. A fire trying to catch on a pile of wet logs in an ocean that had spent its entire recorded history refusing to burn. For one strange stretch of days in March 2004, the logs dried out just enough, the wind stopped pushing the flame sideways. And something the textbooks called impossible spun itself into a real landfalling hurricane. Anyway, you want to call it that? The ocean didn't break a law of physics that slowly cracking a mystery over years. It just found the one narrow gap in the forecasters racing against their own storm in real time. And the real warning in that story is their own agency one storm in the span of about 48 hours. It's about how many other impossible on their screen was real in oceans all over this planet to evacuate. Quietly getting a little wider every storm made landfall somewhere off the coast of southern Brazil in March of 2004, hitting the coast with sustained weather satellites estimated around 85 miles per hour. Should not have existed. Equivalent of a strong Category 1. It had spiral bands wrapping roofs around were torn off, center. Boats were destroyed, in every single way. Around 1,500 homes were significantly damaged because there were fatalities. Hurricanes are not supposed to form in the aftermath. The storm was formally studied, confirmed once in the history of modern weather record keeping, had a and eventually given a name by the local media. Meteorologists, after the state looked at the satellite images. I want to pause here and translate some of these numbers because I don't want you to just hear 85 miles per hour. This storm eventually grew wind fields wide enough to cover an area close to the size of the state of Rhode Island. Body out of a moving car window on the highway, meaning that's roughly the kind of force that was hitting exposed structures along that coastline, except tree branches like dry twigs and rip not sacking straight off houses. And 1,500 damaged homes doesn't mean 1/5 real broken windows spinning in an ocean that, according to almost every text completely peeled away, could never build one. And I know what the title of this video promised you, a bizarre storm that hit and that nobody saw coming. And I know that sounds like some kind of exaggeration, the kind of thing a headline says to get you to click. But that's not quite the full picture, and I want to be upfront about that right away. Some scientists actually did notice unusual ocean conditions building for weeks before this happened. The nobody saw it coming part isn't about scientists missing every clue, it's about something stranger. A system of official rules, built by meteorologists themselves, that made it almost impossible for anyone to officially call this storm what it actually was, even while it was already spinning on their screens. By the end of this video, you're going to understand 3 things clearly. First, exactly why hurricanes are considered physically impossible in this part of the world, and what specific ocean conditions had to break that rule to make what actually happened is far less conspiratorial. The actual detective story of how honestly far more useful to understand in real time, a rare but physically explainable combination of warn people that a hurricane wind shear lined up in a place where forecasting what this storm means for you wherever you live, been built because the ocean conditions that made this failure here wasn't secrecy, it was that N agency's own rulebook. I also want to tell you something before we go further, because I think you deserve to know what kind of video down how fast they could officially respond to something their instruments were already showing unclearly science. That's a real warming oceans are quietly rewriting the rules for where just a much less dramatic one than a cover-up. I'm not going to understanding the real cause, but I promise you, we end this video in a very different place than we started. So let's take a breath here, because I don't want you walking away thinking every ocean on Earth is now secretly a hurricane. Stick with me through the hard part. It's there on purpose. Before we go further, I want to ask you something, and I actually want you to answer in the comments. If you live anywhere near a coastline, even one that's supposed to be safe from tropical storms, tell me where you live and whether you've ever been told that hurricanes just don't happen here. I read these, and I want to know how many of you have been told the same thing this ocean was supposedly following. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, here's what you're signing up for if you subscribe. Every week, we take one real event like this, one storm, one fault line, one glacier that's quietly falling apart. And we go find the actual research behind it, not just the scary headline that gets clipped and reposted there's a second consequence to this story that most people don't think about. You're signing it's honestly more important long-term than the storm itself. Respects your brain. Hurricane Catarina wasn't just a freak weather event. The fear-bait version. It was a preview of what hitting like right now is honestly the easiest way to help this particular possible storm find the people who are scientists who study ocean don't know where to look. Basically, how much warm water is stored below the surface. Let's actually get into why this storm should not have existed. Here's the thing you need to understand about hurricanes before anything else makes sense. A hurricane is basically over recent decades. That doesn't mean hurricanes are suddenly like a fire needs fuel. It means the wet logs are drying out. A hurricane runs on is warm ocean water, even if it's still rare. Specifically, and here's water that should actually than about 79 degrees Fahrenheit. Sitting fairly deep, just in Brazil, just warm on the very surface. Building codes, think of it like trying to start a campfire, are almost always only got a thin layer risk of dry kindling. If your region's entire safety plan is built on storms, might get a little flame going, but it's going to die out fast. That plan doesn't automatically update sustained fuel to ocean conditions quietly shift. The South Atlantic Ocean somebody has to notice all of update the rule book before the storm shows up, not during it. It technically has warm water some deeper lesson near the surface, but this one strange always been shallow and short-lived. It's not really about hurricanes, wind patterns above it. It's about almost always how slow our systems, storm formation systems. There's something called building codes, our evacuation plans, just a fancy way of describing wind blowing at different speeds or directions changing different heights in the atmosphere. And I do want to be honest, picture trying to stack a tower here too, while someone keeps a good explanation doesn't pretend to know more than it does. That's what wind shear does to a forming storm. Don't fully agree on exactly how often events like the whole system can organize into that ocean temperatures continue to shift for a hurricane, or exactly which currently the South Atlantic coastlines are most historically had risk of a similar wind shear. This is an area of real that just wasn't warm enough, not a settled textbook fact. Anyone telling you they know precisely when and where the next impossible storm will form is overselling their circuit. Sat there as the one major ocean basin you can actually do with all of this. Functionally immune because I don't want to leave you with just a. When this storm started forming in March 2004, it was trying to light a fire in a spot the textbook said couldn't catch, and for a little while it almost didn't. Early satellite images showed a messy, disorganized blob of thunderstorms. The kind that pops up and fizzles out constantly. But something had changed underneath it. In the weeks before, ocean temperatures in that specific patch of water had crept unusually high, and just as important, the wind shear that normally tears storms apart had unusually weakened. The wet logs, for once, had dried out just enough, and the wind stopped blowing the flames sideways. The system found just enough fuel and just enough calm air above it to start organizing, first into a subtropical storm, and then, over the following 2 days, into something with a genuine warm core and a clear eye. A true battery sounds like almost too structural definition meteorologists in the hours after a storm like Catarina hits. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Those unglamorous basics are exactly find the most interesting who ride out the disruption. It's not really a story about the ocean suddenly in real danger. It's a story about what happens. Something as simple as clean drinking water. Official rule book. Third, Brazil's National Weather Agency did not have an official name. Actually know your evacuation route and your community's plan before you need it. Again, while a storm is already hurricanes were considered impossible there. There was no protocol built for this. Part of what made the storm so dangerous storm intensified wasn't just the wind. Forecasters were staring at satellites had never even discussed something that structurally, undeniably looked exactly like a hurricane. While their own institutional guidelines effectively told them this couldn't be one subject. Some officials go back to where we reportedly hesitant to fire trying even use the word on a pile of wet logs first in an ocean that has spent its entire recorded history refusing to burn. It triggers evacuation one strange stretch of days in March 2004, and a level of alarm that agencies don't just enough, especially for something their own system says and something the textbooks call impossible, spun itself. Meanwhile, the storm kept moving west toward the coast of South Catarina State in southern Brazil. It just found the one narrow coastal town that had never built houses, ever slip through drainage systems. And the real warning in that story isn't about one storm for hurricane coast of Brazil. Why would they? It's about how many other every piece of historical data they had told them oceans all over this planet are quietly getting a little wider every single year.